Welcome to the Loadout Podcast with Aaron Perlow.
Welcome back to the Loadout Music Podcast. Today we are joined by Fred LeBlanc of Cowboy Mouth. Fred, thanks for making time today.
Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it. Some great pictures you got behind you.
I try to cover probably the most ridiculous one of me and full length fur coat.
I like that.
That's hot and juicy,
like
you know. So man, it's a thrill to have you on, and I want to get to I have a lot of different things I want to talk about. But first, I've got to ask. You know, you're a lifelong musician, and this has got to be this pandemic period we're going through, where everybody's locked down. It's got to be driving you insane.
You know, surprisingly, personally, it's not really driving me that crazy. We've been pretty much on the road consistently since we started about 30 years ago. We took a 2-month break during Katrina, and then I took a few weeks off when my first child was born, then my second child was born. So this is actually the longest I've ever been off the road with Cowboy Mouth. But you know, it hasn't really been that bad. I mean, I'm kind of a saver, and I got married literally right before all this went down. I got married a few days right before everything went down. So it's, you know, it's the opportunity to stay home hasn't been necessarily all bad.
Yeah. I mean, I've talked to a handful of musicians recently, John Oates and Kenny Wayne Shepherd, and both of them but they kind of seem to be in a good place about it. They've never been off the road this long, and but it's allowed them to do some things, to reconnect with some people, and from a family perspective, they've never been able to really.
Family and friends, you know, I've done that, and one of the things I was doing for a while, I was just playing free acoustic concerts, me and my acoustic guitar, on the band's Facebook page, just to keep the fan base engaged, you know, just to give them something to kind of look forward to since everybody was locked down. And it's gone really, really well. And so, I mean, actually, John and I are actually doing a couple of acoustic shows in South Florida tomorrow and Saturday. You know, they're flying us out there to do that. You know, it's social distance, you know, somebody's house, you know, the whole shebang, and it's just us with acoustic guitars. But you know, it's an opportunity to just go out there and perform again, which, you know, as a musician, as an entertainer, you just kind of programmed or wired to do pretty much at the drop of a hat. So I'll be looking forward to that. As far as everything else goes, I mean, you know, just trying to figure out what the new paradigm will be, if indeed there is a new paradigm. You know, I personally kind of think that all this will kind of slink away just like everything else, and we'll go back to relative normal, you know, before the end of the year. But you know, who knows what's going to happen?
Next thing you know, we've got injectable bleach at every corner store. You know.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So I want to talk about your career because, you know, I don't know how many people are familiar with one of your earlier bands, and that is Dash Rip Rock, which is kind of an insane show to see, and just
definitely back then.
Yeah, and I mean, even Dash Rip Rock, even after you left the band, it was, you know, still a very entertaining band. I mean, you have a special brand of entertainment for those who haven't seen Cowboy Mouth live. But you know, Dash Rip Rock must have been an interesting primer to the show that's ultimately evolved for you and your showmanship with Cowboy Mouth.
Well, with Dash Rip Rock, it was such a for me personally, as well as professionally, it was such a you know, just a rocket launch. I mean, personally, I'd played in bands around New Orleans, but this is long before the internet. This is long before, you know, anything. This is still when people were using cassettes and 45 vinyl and all that type of stuff. So it was, there was, you know, it was very, you know, like you would have music scenes, but they'd be very insular, very geographically based. And it was rare to find a band, even like a successful band on a local level, that would, you know, bite the bullet and go on tour. And I'd played in bands that had done well in New Orleans, you know, for a few years, but, you know, for them going on tour meant maybe going from New Orleans to Baton Rouge, which is 70 miles away. You know, that was the extent of a tour. You know, with Dash, I had met Bill because Dash had actually opened for a band that I was in, a rockabilly cover band with all these DC kids who went to Tulane, and I was like the New Orleans guy. And they were called the Mistreaters. Really, really good musicians, nice guys, but they all looked the part. They all did their hair in pompadours and everything like that. They had money. They came from DC, and it was fine. And there I come, with ripped shirts and long scraggly hair, but I could play a rockabilly beat like nobody's business. So I had met Bill because they had opened for us in New Orleans, and then we turned around and we opened for them in Baton Rouge. And I remember thinking, man, these guys are pretty good. This drummer's not very good, but this guitar player and bass player are good. Man, I could do something with that. Just thinking, using my imagination. And then about 3 weeks later, Bill called me and asked me if I wanted to play on some demos he was making, because they didn't want to use the drummer that they had at the time. And we just really clicked. And then a few months later, he called me drunk one night and asked me to join the band, because I was living in Georgia at the time. I'd moved to Georgia to start a band with a friend of mine, and it didn't go anywhere. And then, so I moved back, and surprise, surprise, he hadn't told everybody else he asked me to join the band. But I just kept thinking, okay, just give me a rehearsal. Give me a rehearsal. Give me a rehearsal. Just let me play one song. Give me a rehearsal. And then so finally, after a whole bunch of day-long drama, I got in the rehearsal space, and the bass player, who's still a really good friend of mine today, we played one song, and he goes, "Well, welcome to the band." And then it was like this 4.5 year just insane rocket ride, because Bill had vision. He definitely had an idea of getting past New Orleans or Louisiana but taking the best aspects of it, taking the romantic aspects of it. And because a lot of times you'd see these bands, in order to make it, they would move to Los Angeles or New York or someplace like that, or some sort of music epicenter. And New Orleans at the time, even though it had a rich history, it wasn't really known as an epicenter at the time. It had a lot of economic problems, which made it cheap to live, which made it the perfect place for woodshedding, as a musician and all that. So, but, I kind of saw Bill's point in that when you go to like a New York or a Los Angeles or even like a St. Louis, and you're from New Orleans, you go there to play a show, you're the cool visitor from out of town, and everybody loves you. You move to New York, move to Los Angeles, all of a sudden you become the competition. It's like, okay. So we just went touring around, and I was such a babe in the woods. I'd barely been out of Harahan, where I grew up, in New Orleans. I didn't even know that much about New Orleans. And there I was with these two lunatics playing these shows. And it was just, the thing took off pretty quickly, but at the same time, we paid a lot of dues. And there's a lot of really funny, wild stories. And the band really grew. And I played with a lot of what I considered my rock and roll heroes at the time. I mean, 6 months before I joined this band, I was sitting there listening, to bands like The Replacements and Jason and the Scorchers, REM, these bands when they were just first starting out, listening to these indie records. And none of the people I knew had any interest in that stuff, because they were into stuff like Haircut 100 and all this crap, And it's just like, I wanted to be a musician, but I knew I didn't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of leaning more towards these bands that were playing they were just rock bands, rock and roll bands. And so when when the thing with Bill and Dash happened, all of a sudden within 6 months, I was opening for these bands who I considered rock and roll heroes. We played a lot of shows with The Replacements. We played a lot of shows with Jason the Scorchers, Guadalcanal Diary. Who's that band? Circle Jerks. We played a lot of shows with Circle Jerks. And all of a sudden, I was just living my dream life. But at the same time, it was 1,000 miles an hour, fueled by lots of alcohol and lots of drugs and lots of craziness. And, my mindset at the time was, focus. And, these guys, as much as I love them, and, I'm sure they'll admit it to you too, is all of a sudden, everything that you could want happened. You had, not on a nationwide level, but definitely on a regional level. We were very very powerful band. It was strong. We made more money than we'd ever seen before, which is not much, but for us, it was like, wow. And, you go and people would just go berserk over you. And it was a very wild blur of a time.
Yeah.
And that about 4.5 years, I said, I got to stop doing this. Because as much as I loved it, Dash was a very negative oriented thing in terms of its viewpoint, in terms of its vision. And I wanted to form something that would be kind of like more like punk rock gospel. And that's where kind of Cowboy Mouth came in.
And so somewhere around, I think it was somewhere in '89, you left Dash.
No, I left Dash and I formed Cowboy Mouth in the end of '90.
Yeah, and it was you and John Thomas Griffith, who's kind of been your partner in crime, it seems like, ever since.
Still is.
And I was saying earlier when you and I were talking that I've probably seen you guys play more than any other band I've ever seen play because of my 5 years spent living in New Orleans, and you guys are a real fixture of the music community there, not only nationally, but there you have a special place in the heart of people who are New Orleanians. But you also have this remarkably unique, just even the way you set up on stage with your drum kit being front and center.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? That is such a signature part of what the live experience and you and your positioning with the band on stage.
I was a big fan of another indie 80s band called Camper Van Beethoven. I really loved those guys. And we actually did a tour. We did a lot of shows and did tours with Cracker. And, I actually got to meet and talk with Dave Lowry a lot. And, I went to see them when I was still playing in Dash Rip Rock, and I was really interested in the way that, Dave was obviously the boss, but everybody in the band, with the exception of the drummer, was right at the edge of the stage. There's like 5 guys right at the edge of the stage. So you never got bored. I was like, there was always someone or something to look at. And I thought, that's interesting. And, and every time, like being in Dash Rip Rock, we did a lot of opening shows, like I mentioned. We would, we played a lot of shows. Who did we play with? A lot of the big 80s bands, like Los Lobos, we did 1 or 2 shows with them. I think maybe just 1. But a lot with Guadalcanal, some with the Replacements, some with, it's all kind of blurry. But when you're the opening act and you're a 3-piece, you don't get the advantage of the whole stage. But that worked to our advantage, because all of a sudden I would just be front and center and Bill would be on my right and Hokey, the bass player, Ned Hickle, he'd be on my left. And it just visually worked because, unfortunately a lot of drummers, they just kind of do their thing. But I was also singing about 30% of the songs. I was singing backup on 8 on the other, on most of Bill's songs, I sang at least 1 backup. And, I've always known that, even when I was younger, that I can play guitar, I can play bass, I can play piano, but when I play drums, I don't know what it is, but when I play drums, people pay attention. It's always been that way. So it just made sense. And then when I saw Camper Van Beethoven, I thought, well, why don't I just move the drums up front? It's not that I wanted to move up front and keep everybody back. I just wanted to be where the party was. That's all. And that was literally all my thinking was. And then when Cowboy Mouth came into being, I realized, okay, I'm a front man, so I have to be in the front. And number 1, and number 2, I have to get rid of a couple of cymbals so people can see me, because I didn't want to cut off 25% of the audience. Because being a front man, you have to be able to see the audience, and they have to be able to see you. And there has to be a lot of eye contact, because energy isn't just translated by going nuts and doing crazy stuff. Energy can be right in the eyes, looking at somebody like a really intense, like Joe Strummer, from the Clash, just sitting there, just meaning it, And so that was my thing. I just wanted to move up front with the action. I just wanted to be part of the party.
But it's interesting in that physicality is a real part of your showmanship. You're sitting there pounding away at that drum kit. You're sweating, and you are, screaming into the microphone. It's the physicality of it is really part of the experience of seeing you guys, don't you think?
Yeah, sure. You got to understand, I haven't seen me play that many times. I just do it. I just get up there and do it.
Yeah.
I do what comes naturally, and it's just, thank God people seem to like it. Even still, they still seem to like it. And I try not to think about it too much. I mean, you obviously learn a lot as a performer. You learn what you can do, what you can't do, what you shouldn't do, what you should do, because the ultimate goal isn't, you have to understand, being a musician, being a performer, whether you're Mick Jagger or the guy playing Jimmy Buffett covers on a Holiday Inn on Tuesday night, um, you know, being a musician, it's service industry. And, you basically, it's your job to entertain these folks. And my goal was always to kind of do what the old gospel churches did. I grew up in a Catholic church, and, saw that, all they did was pile original sin on us while, so we're trying to have sex with the kids. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to. But then, there was this independent television station in New Orleans when I was about 5 or 6, and they used to broadcast the previous week's gospel church service before Bugs Bunny on Saturday mornings. So I'd get up and watch it. It was great, just the way these people just cut loose. And it was an African-American church where, the preacher would do his thing, but you'd see these people, they would just sing and scream and just kind of cut loose. And it wasn't as rote, and it wasn't about being beaten down like my experience in the Catholic Church. It was about lifting up. It was about enhancing the spirit so these people could go out, cleansing the spirit, but also enhancing it so they could go out and deal with everything they needed to deal with in the next week or month or whatever. And I really liked that idea. That idea really appealed to me. And when I quit Dash Rip Rock, Dash was very much a punk thing. And I love punk rock. I love it to death. But at the same time, at a certain point, especially as you become an adult, you realize that punk rock, as great as it is, it's basically a car going 90 miles an hour headed to a brick wall. Okay, what do you do? It's like, okay, I can do this. I can bitch, I can whine, I can act on all my frustrations. But at a certain point, when do I take that power in my hands and turn it into something that will enrich not only me, but the people around me? And I saw kind of an outlet in that, in gospel, or at least the way the Black gospel churches were. And that, and I didn't realize I had this kind of personality, but like, instead of saying things in between songs, all right, we're going to get fucked up, everybody go, just doing that, like a lot of frontmen did, or bitching about whatever the political bullshit of the day was. My thing was, I was reading a lot of Norman Vincent Peale, a spiritual writer who was popular in the 60s and stuff. And I found it really uplifting. So I'd take some of his stuff, things that I'd read in his books, and I'd say that in between songs, just throw it out there and be like, believe in yourself and anything's possible. But just say it, whatever. And, because those were things that I wish I'd heard when I was a kid, looking for guidance in the world, And I noticed the response was really powerful and very visceral. People reacted strongly to it. I was like, okay, all right, let me keep pushing this. And then it just became this thing where I became kind of this rock and roll preacher. And it's not false in any way. It's something that I really believe in, and it's a part of my personality, but it's a way of using parts of your personality to really bring the best out of yourself as well as the audience. Because the physicality that you talk about isn't just about me or the guys in the band. It's about the audience too. It's the whole experience of everybody in the room or everybody in the field. If you're playing a festival, you try to get them to use what you're doing to maybe find something better in themselves, even if it's just for a moment, and if people choose to celebrate it by getting hammered or maybe looking into themselves a little more, all I do is give it. What people do with it is up to them.
So I'm gonna veer off here a little bit based on something you just mentioned, and this is part of my experience from New Orleans, and I want to ask you about it. So I always get very frustrated, and I'm curious, as a native of New Orleans, if you do too, when I hear national media talk about issues of race in the city of New Orleans, because my experience, and I believe it stems from the music community, because people are on top of each other and you've got multiracial groups playing music together. But then I've lived in, I think, 8 or 10 different cities. I've never lived in a city where people of color and white folks of all races got along better.
Uh-huh.
And I always felt like that was part of just the fabric of the community and celebration and playing music together. And I'm just curious what your perspective is on that.
Well,
Not to say that there aren't.
no, not to say
Race
that
is an American issue. Yeah.
of course, but at the same time, you have to look at, I don't look at people as, how can I put this? This is a little difficult because you don't want to say the wrong thing because people will grab onto that and, potentially try to end your career or whatever. But at the same time, I would think it's been my experience in New Orleans that it's hard to be a racist when you're a musician in New Orleans, or a musician anywhere, because it's like Mick Jones, the guitar player for The Clash, said something really interesting, that all music is connected. It's all connected in some way. And if you sit down and think about it, it's really right. That's a very profound statement, in that it's all connected. And it depends on how you see people. It depends on how you see yourself. Do you see yourself do I see myself as a white guy from, who's from Louisiana, born and raised in New Orleans? Or do I see myself as a soul, that stretches across various, dimensions and lifetimes? When you look in somebody's eyes, you don't see a color, you see who they are, who their essence is, and after this life, doesn't matter really what color or costume you wear. That's just the way I choose to look at it. I mean, a lot of the music I grew up listening to was, a lot of the old rhythm and blues. A lot of kids in my age group were listening to all the hair metal and all that stuff, and I just couldn't stand it. But I found a bunch of old blues records like Bo Diddley and stuff like that. And could I at the time, being 10 years old or 11 years old, could I relate to being an African-American male in Chicago in the 40s and 50s and struggle? No, I couldn't relate to it at all on that level. But as a human being, I could relate to the emotion. I could relate to the soul of it. I could relate to the human experience of it, and then translate it into my own for something positive and say, okay, this person turned this experience into something that I feel is beautiful and powerful. And through that experience, he's translating that energy to me, translating that energy to whoever hears this, and then they do with it what they will. I mean, as far as like the racial climate in New Orleans or Louisiana, I'm not qualified to comment really on that in a way that will be satisfactory to anybody to whom those things really matter. When I look at people, when I see people, I try not to see, certain aspects of their identity, but to see the whole person. And seeing the whole person doesn't necessarily take into account little things that might not be important to the overall experience of who this human being is. Not to say that race or sexuality or gender and stuff are not important, but it's like the whole Martin Luther King thing, the content of the character, as opposed to, the color of the skin and all that. There's a lot to be said for that. I feel in New Orleans, the experience is similar for a lot of people, because there is that coexistence of life and death. I mean, we all know that one day the city is going to be overtaken by the river. It's just the way it is, and we're just all biding our time more or less until that happens. And so how do you bide that time? Do you sit there and live in fear? Oh my God, it's going to do it one day. Oh, we're all going to die one day. We're all going to find out what's on the other end of this veil. And I tend to believe that there's something really grandiose there. Some people tend to believe that there's nothing there. And who's to say either one is right or wrong? It all depends on the energy that you live your life with and what you do with the energy that comes into who you are and who you put out as a person. And so I took the energy that I saw and felt listening to a lot of those old rhythm and blues records and a lot of those old gospel shows, and what it churned into me, what it churned inside of me, and then took that, and I still throw it out there today. So I don't, a lot of people talk about racial climate here and racial climate there. And I think when you focus on differences, that's when you get in trouble. When you focus on similarities, the things that actually bring people together, the things that make people make humanity a common experience for everybody, then you're on a lot healthier ground.
Well, and that's kind of where I was driving at, because my experience living in New Orleans had always been, I had never been in a city where I could be in a room listening to music, and that room is the definition of multiracial. Whereas in a lot of other cities, you go see a rock show and it's just all white faces. Whereas, if you go to the old somewhere in New Orleans East, or even go to like the old Donna's Bar that used to be on Rampart that I used to love to go see like brass bands play at, which was such a great place. Yeah. But I mean, you look around and you just have a mixed crowd, and it's an unusual experience when you compare it to most other cities in the country. I found it, in the most wonderful way.
Yeah. I think, people, human beings tend to be tribal. They want to stick with their own because they understand it and there's less of a fear factor. So there's that. But at the same time, all the cultures are so hand in hand with each other. And, like I said, when you focus on differences, the things that make people feel different or apart, APART, different, separated from one another, that's when you get into trouble. Music, thankfully, is something that tends to bring people together. Yeah. Like you said, going into a room, seeing a brass band, coming into a Cowboy Mouth show, anybody can enjoy us. We're easy to enjoy. We're not that hard to like, just, I designed it that way to where, like, we had this producer one time who said basically our songs are nursery rhymes for adults, which I thought was great. That was a great way to put it. And, but it's just, it's all about the celebration of what's inside and touching that part of what's inside your soul, and kind of encouraging the audience to kind of let that out, and different people have different ways of doing it, and nobody's right, nobody's wrong.
Yeah. So with Cowboy Mouth, the band starts in 1990. You guys build up a very strong local and regional following, and then towards the late 90s, Jenny Says hits, and all of a sudden, everybody knows Cowboy Mouth because that song just blew the roof off. What is that? What's that like?
You know what? It was fun. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. It was frustrating in some ways because we had a record label. And I'm not going to focus too much on this, but I do want it out there. I mean, we had a record label where we were signed by one group of people, and those people were fired. And then the next group of people that came in, they didn't want to let us go because they knew we were going to get to another label and get a deal. And so we were kind of in a lose-lose position in that we weren't really going to have a hit because they didn't want us to have a hit, but we weren't going to be able to go find another label because, they didn't want to let us go because, label politics, I've never seen bigger egos on people than there are in record labels. And we had some supporters in there, and Jenny Says actually happened. It was a fluke. It wasn't supposed to happen. Because what happened was the song came, we released the album, and they put the single out, and the song, it kind of came and went because the album version, it's good, but it's nothing like it was live. We had a real problem capturing what we did live for a long time, especially in the 90s when you're dealing with recording albums through labels, and there's all sorts of politics and BS that you have to go through. You have to jump through about 50 hoops before you ever really accomplished anything. But so what happened was they had fired everybody who had signed us and been responsible for signing us, except this this gentleman who was the radio programmer who had become a fan of ours. He said, listen, if you give me a live version of what you guys do, just give me a live version of Jenny Says, I'll service it to radio without the president and the vice president knowing what's going to happen. And I think we'll do something. So me and my buddy, a guy named Mike May, really talented engineer, we stuck some, we had a couple of ADAT machines, old digital machines, like the prototype digital machines. And we put them in the basement of the House of Blues in New Orleans. And we didn't tell them either because you had to, back then you had to sign all kinds of paperwork and you had to give them your firstborn male child in order to get anything. So we didn't tell them. So we recorded it, and we recorded the live version of Jenny there, and then edited it because it was about 10 minutes, and we put it about 4 minutes, 5 minutes. Skip, the radio guy, sent it out, and it just exploded. And that was fun. I remember that because you drive in, and you drive into a town, and we were getting so much work that we had to stop. Vanning to a lot of cities. We started flying places, and so you get picked up, or get a rental van or something like that, and you turn on the radio, and there you are, and you could just feel the excitement. And what that did is that gave us the opportunity to get on a lot of these radio shows that were very big in the day, like Z Fest, N Fest, Point Fest, all these radio stations, they had their radio festivals. And I realized, and when we first started, we were getting kind of the crap end of the stick, because these festivals were going all day, and they'd start like 10:30 in the morning, and then like the headliner, like In Excess. So we played a lot of shows. We actually did a lot of shows individually with Beck, but we also played a lot of festivals with him. It was during the 2 turntables and a microphone period. Totally. Great show. Anyway, so we must have done easily over 100 of these festivals. Just tons of them. But then I noticed it was like, okay, we get like the 11 a.m. slot, and you're playing in an arena or like what do they call those? An amphitheater. And the people who bought the tickets, they're not going to show up till later, but the lawn is full. And so you're talking about a football field length between you and your audience. So I remember, okay, and you get like a 20-minute set. So we'd play 2 songs. One of them would be Jenny. And I bought a wireless microphone, bought a really powerful wireless microphone. And my job wasn't to put on a good show. My job was to have the DJs in every one of these towns on Monday morning raving about my band, raving. So I would do anything. I mean, anything. I'd jump off the stage and I'd literally run all the way up to where the people where the seats weren't, the green area. And I'd be like, hey, come on, nobody's using these seats. Let's go. Sorry about riot. It's gotten a lot of trouble. And I'd climb lighting rigs, and I'd swing off them and slide down poles, just anything, using what kind of came naturally to me anyway. But and that's how we built really a live reputation that still persists to this day. And so, and without fail, it'd be like, oh, how about that festival on Saturday? Beck was great, or In Excess was great, or Matchbox 20 was great. But did you see Cowboy Mouth? Oh my God. Mission accomplished. Because we weren't really getting support from our label. And so we just had to make it happen ourselves. So that's what we did.
I don't think the casual listener realizes how important the label can be to the success. There's so much, there's a ton of good music out there. I mean,
there's tons, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But the label can really make or break the visibility, for lack of a better word.
Oh yeah. Especially we had built a pretty strong reputation for ourselves. And a lot of these corporate entities, they like to, once they get their hands on you, they like to kind of gain the upper hand. And so their thing was just like, okay, well, listen, the record's out, and you guys tour too much. So why don't you stay off the road, and we'll pay you to stay off the road for a couple of months. And I was like, no.
It was cheaper for them to keep you at home.
Yeah. Well, they also control it too. So yeah, because they don't have to pay tour support or whatever. And it's like, no, that makes no sense. Don't be an idiot. So we just kept touring, and then and we realized we were in a kind of a defensive position with our label, unfortunately.
Mm.
And so we just did our best to make everything happen that we could. The second record we did for them, we never really could get our hands on a producer that fit us for both of our major label recordings for Universal, and it was all politics. It was like an A&R woman who wanted to get in with a certain camp of people who were successful and cool, so she'd offer one of them a job to produce us, and I'm like, what? It's a little backstage politics bullshit that just goes on that you're just expected to wade through and make a career out of. And I think we did as well as we could, given what we knew, and it was something to see, bands who were friends of ours, like the Matchbox guys, and we loved playing with them. They loved playing with us, and we played a lot of shows together. And then all of a sudden, but they had a situation that was very supportive, and they were really a good band too, But all of a sudden, they took off, and we had our thing, and it was good. But it was one of the problems we had is being such a dynamic live act. As much as it helped us gain fans, it also kind of hurt us in opportunities too. I mean, Rob Thomas, I love him to death. He's a great guy, but one of the things he quoted in Rolling Stone magazine, of all things, was like, 2 bands you don't want to let open for you: the Bare Naked Ladies and Cowboy Mouth. I'm like, what are you doing? He meant it as a compliment, but kind of, it's like, okay, well, thanks, buddy. Appreciate that.
Well, but I would imagine, that was when you guys were really coming of age in the late 90s. That was when the economic model was beginning to tilt, where the money was going completely away from records being a source of income for bands to, it started to become all about live shows.
Yeah, well, records never really were a source of income for us. Unfortunately, it's just the nature of the beast. The only bands I ever knew that made money from records were Bare Naked Ladies when they sold their millions, Hootie and the Blowfish, who were really good friends of ours, who gave us our first break, by the way, our first real break. And like the Matchbox guys and those guys. Those are the only people I knew who ever actually made money from record sales.
Yeah. Well,
for us, it was always, it's all, for me, it's always been about the live show, honestly, and not to be Debbie Downer here, but the live show was the one thing that nobody could ever steal from me,
And it's a remarkable experience. You mentioned Hootie and the Blowfish. I believe you produced material for Mark Bryan.
I produced a few tracks. Yeah, it was great. I love those guys. We go way back. When they had their moment, and they had sold over 2 or 3 million records, and the power was in their hands for a little while. They went back to all their friends, all the bands, because we had played with them. They had played with us. We used to crash at their houses. I used to let them crash at my apartment in New Orleans whenever they came through. And, we were just really close, really good friends. And they went back and they grabbed bands like us, Dylan Fence, all these other bands, Edward McCain. And they said, hey, we're having a great moment. Come on. So we went from playing, Tipitina's in New Orleans, Grant Street Dance Hall in Lafayette, to literally 2 weeks later playing the Greek Theater in Los Angeles, sold out. They were like, we love you guys, this will get you a record deal, and it did.
So if you're going to send a case of wine to somebody, it's definitely going to be Darius Rucker before Rob Thomas, right?
Oh, I love Rob. It's been a long, long, long time, and that's not meant as
no. I totally get where you're going.
We had a lot of laughs. And Darius, we actually played with them about 2 years ago, before this tour they did last summer. Every year they play a couple of shows around Charleston, and they hired us to play one of those, and it was just great to see him. I'm still close with Mark. I run into Sony once in a blue moon. Dean, but Dean and Darius, when I see them, it's just like, hey guys, how you been? They're like friends, and it's like, wow, how's life? It's just it's life. It goes in different directions for everybody, and it's not about being snippy about what you don't have. It's about really appreciating what you do have. And if I saw Rob Thomas today, I'd give him a hug. Say, hey man, well, not a hug, socially distance.
Yeah,
what's going on? It's just life. Just life. I mean, honestly, I've had a great life. You can complain about what did or didn't happen or decisions you made, but you're living in the moment, and I'm happier now in terms of being in Cowboy Mouth than I ever have been. It's a great band. We have a great time. We genuinely enjoy each other's company. We genuinely enjoy what we do. And as soon as this whole damn lockdown thing is done, we're going to have a party like nobody has ever seen.
Well, so you guys also have a relatively new record out too. You want to talk a little bit about that? Open Wide came out in the end of March, I believe.
Surprise! Yeah, it came out right then. Yeah.
And that is you've got actually got a John Denver cover on there. You have a kind of a new version of Jenny Says. It's a short album in terms of the number of songs on it.
Well, it's an EP. It's an EP. That's kind of what we think. It's kind of what we're thinking that the business model is going to be from now on. Like, I don't really see the point of really gathering a whole bunch of songs and, waiting for a year or two to try to put out your best songs. Just put out EPs or singles and just kind of keep a steady flow going so the fan base is always engaged and, creatively you're not stuck in one thing constantly. And I was really proud of this EP. Once again, the friend, that buddy of mine, Mike Mayu, who actually recorded and mixed the landmark version of Jenny Says, he has a mobile studio with an SSL board and an old style SSL. So we ended up recording with that and mixing in that, and it was just fun. It's I think the EP's, I think it's strong. I think the song selection is really good, and I think it kind of goes by. Like it drives really fast, and then
it's a rocking album. I mean, it's.
I mean, what do you think? I'll sit there.
Yeah. No, I mean it's.
Hold on a second. Who's that? Look. She's about to get upset. My wife just walked into her office with a baby in tow. This is going to be broadcast, so these people might not want their kid on. It's beautiful. How old? Like 2 or 3 months? Beautiful. And there you go.
Well,
what do you think? You like it?
So I think we talked earlier about how the challenges of conveying that live feeling into a record, and I think what I hear in it is it's got the thunder of Cowboy Mouth that you expect to see at a show. You get that sense from a studio setting. So it's very true to who what Cowboy Mouth stands for and the brand of Cowboy Mouth to me.
Good. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So I know we're running short on time.
We can go longer if you want. It's fine.
But I want to get you out of here on this though. I know, and we're gonna get a little off music, but back in 2016, I believe you wrote a children's book. So tell me a little bit about that, because I know it's a little different. So I'd love to hear about it.
It's called Fred, the New Orleans Drummer Boy. It's published by a company called River Road Press, and it's basically a children's book equivalent of a Cowboy Mouth show. The character of Fred, the New Orleans Drummer Boy, who is me, much younger, obviously, and his buddies, they have a band. They're looking for a bass player, but the bass player they get, he's really good, but he's also shy. And so the kids try to encourage him because they're about to play a show at the local crawfish fest or something like that. And it's like the bass player is scared because he's never played in front of people before. And the kids tell him, don't get scared, get excited. Don't get scared. It's the same energy. Just put it in a different direction. Don't get scared. Just get excited. It's like a Cowboy Mouth show, kind of. And at the end of it, the show goes great and the bass player has a great time and he never gets scared. But man, does he ever get excited.
All right, man. Well, Fred, this has been great. It's great to hear the band is still just kind of plugging along, and how happy you are with life in Cowboy Mouth. Appreciate you taking time out being on the loadout today, and I hope you guys can get back on the road so people can experience what you guys are all about after this pandemic.
We will. We'll get back. We'll get back on the road. You can't kill bad grass, Aaron. Thank you guys very much. I'm very proud of where we are, and who knows what the future holds. If it all ended tomorrow, I'd be nothing but grateful. But I think I still got some piss and vinegar in my step.
Right on, man. Well, Fred, thank you for your time, and have a good one, man.
All the best.